Everyone, I am Sophia Jardine, and I'm here to tell you a little story about my country, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and the human resource development system of the civil service over the past 20 years. Now today what I will do, I will outline the objectives of my research, the methodology that I used. Let's give you a little insight on what the HRD system was like in 1994, then discuss some changes and then let you know the status of some of the recommendations which were made in 1994, delve into the preliminary results of this research that I did, and I'll then go into some conclusions and the next steps for this particular research. Now, for my study, some of my objectives were to examine the changes in the St. Vincent and the Grenadines civil service from 1994 to 2014, assess the extent to which the recommendations made in 1994 have been implemented, as well as compare the past and current perceptions of members of the civil service as it relates to motivation, training, and, well, utilization or placement of the trained persons in the civil service. So the study that I used as a benchmark, it's actually an MPhil thesis by Miss Jean Celine Jack, done in 1994. If you want to have a look at this thesis, it can be found in the West Indies and Special Collections at UWI, or in the National Archives of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So what I did is, first of all, I had to contact the author. So I asked her for permission to use the questions that she used in her study, and I won't say that I replicated the study, that would be incorrect. I just followed similar methodology just for comparative purposes, so that I'll be able to make comparative conclusions comparing her results to mine. Also, in order to map the changes over the 20-year period, I had to make several trips to the National Archives of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and conduct various unstructured interviews with persons who are in the civil service, especially those persons who are in the service for 20 years and over. In addition, following what Jack did in 1994, what she did, she conducted interviews with the top management of the civil service, like permanent secretaries, the ministers of government, and so on. And she also conducted a survey with 10% of the civil service at the time. Now, I collected my data between the 5th and the 16th of January this year. So that's a very short time span, so I really didn't get the privilege that she had to spend that much time at home in St. Vincent and the Grenadines to really get as much persons as she did. So as you can see there, I did the structured interviews with some permanent secretaries, and I also did an online survey, but with online surveys, the response rate was really low, and I only got about 12 responses out of the 30 who agreed to participate. It's a small sample, but nevertheless, I'll still let you know what I found because it's a preliminary study. So what happened in 1994? What was it like in 1994 in the civil service of St. Vincent and the Grenadines? First of all, it was very fragmented. Now you see a long list of different organizations after the word fragmented. All these different organizations or entities all engaged in the HRD function, but everybody planned everything separately. There was the Service Commissions Department responsible for overall HRD, Ministry of Finance and Planning, who's supposed to finance the training and so on, National Training Committee, who to actually conduct training, the Job Evaluation Committee, who were responsible for evaluating requests for new posts. So it was really disjointed at the time and really in quite a terrible state. Also, the respondents in 1994 said that there were very little opportunities for promotion within the service. There was inadequate training of the top managers to really manage the HRD function within the civil service. And then there was very poor placement of skilled persons within the service. So, given these findings in 1994, what are the changes that have impacted the HRD system since then? So, some of these might seem really simple, but 20 years is a pretty long time. And I remember last night we were saying that 20 years is a sort of rite of passage for persons, so I'll just get into some of it. one of the major changes was the change of government in 2001, where it switched to the Unity Labour Party administration, headed by the current Prime Minister, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves. Now, under his mandate, he instituted an education revolution, where universal secondary education was instituted. There was also a vision to have one university graduate per household by 2025. So these would have impacted on not only the country, but on the civil service of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And comparing the educational qualifications, say, for entry into the civil service in 1994, the entry requirements were, say, 3 O-levels. But now, the entry requirements is much higher than that, and the educational composition of the civil service has really changed, where in 1994, the majority of persons had secondary education. Now, in 2015, we consider a significantly large number of persons are there with bachelor's degrees and further. Another factor impacting the HRD system is the working conditions. Now, some of these may seem very basic to us in 2015, but some things that seem simple, like air conditioning, it wasn't common in 1994. So it would have been really hot. We live in the tropics. They would have been really uncomfortable in their working environments at the time and really disgruntled. So now in 2015, there have been several infrastructural changes which would have impacted the civil service, such as new buildings, modern office amenities, and so on. So definitely working conditions have changed compared to 1994. Another big one is technology. Again, another simple thing that we consider simple now is copying machines. You know, in 1994, we were relying on typewriters. You know, copying machine was a luxury. But now, the copying machines, it's so common. You know, it has really sped up how work is done in the civil service and has therefore sped up how civil servants are supposed to react to certain things and behaving as it relates to their work environment. Also, email is another big one. It has made information sharing really easy as it relates to the opportunities for training and other information that would trickle down from the top managers of the civil service. Also, there is also another technology called the Smart Stream system, which can act as a human resource information system where it can house information on persons with particular degrees and so on. Now, the Service Commission Department is responsible for the HRD function, but this particular software is not readily accessible there. It's housed in another department, but it's still there, it's still accessible to them. So then, Jack made some recommendations for the HRD function in the civil service in 1994. So the first one, an HRD policy should be developed. And good news, this has been done. I actually have a copy here. It's really quite a comprehensive document outlining the HRD functions for the civil service, the training, as well as for the country in terms of the needs of the country, the skills requirements of the country. So it's really quite comprehensive. Unfortunately, this is a document that has been drafted in around 2007, 2009, but it has not been passed in cabinet as yet. However, in 2015, it hasn't been passed yet. But, however, the director of training informed me that they actually use this document as a guide, even though it has not been passed as yet. They use it as a guide to really guide them in terms of the training functions, the HRD functions within the Service Commission's Department of the Civil Service. Also, Jack recommended integrating and coordinating the HRD functions. Now, if you recall, the HRD was seen as very fragmented, as I mentioned in 1994, with all these different committees doing the same thing but not working together. So I can say that this is now coordinated much better than it was in 1994. The Service Commission Department, they handle their own planning, they do their own budgets, they coordinate with other persons within the civil service to really ensure that the programs that they put out there are in line with what is needed. Another recommendation is operating manuals. I say yes because the chief personnel officer told me that this was actually a progress indicator for the year 2014. Now, I did this study in January 2015, so most likely this has not really been circulated as it should have been as yet, but it is there and it is one of the progress indicators. Now, another recommendation was to decentralize the HRD functions. This more deals with the managerial aspect of things in that the managers should really take charge of the HRD role in terms of encouraging the staff, developing the staff, letting them know the training opportunities, developing them personally, and other functions related to HRD that are not exclusive to the more administrative functions. So I put the question mark here because I'm not really sure if that's really being done. I asked the permanent secretaries a bonus question regarding what do they think their role in the HRD function is. And they basically said, well, you know, service commissions really deals with that, but, you know, we have a role to let persons know about the training and develop them and encourage them to take part in whatever developmental activities that are happening. Another recommendation was to update the civil service orders, which were in effect since before independence in the 1970s. And this has not been done. So the civil servants are still governed by these civil service orders. Also, another recommendation was the systematic training and development of managers. I must say that this really has been done over the years, especially with in the early stages of the ULP administration. They really pushed for a lot of managerial development of the top managers to ensure that they develop the HR. I understand that this has been lessened now due to financial constraints, but it is still happening, but just not as often as it used to. All right, so let's get into what the permanent secretaries or the senior members of the civil service thought in 1994 compared to 2015. Now, they believe that there was adequate management capability in 1994, but it wasn't utilized effectively. And there is a similar response in 2015 in that the managers, they are equipped with educational qualifications, they have the degrees, but they need more soft skills. They need more people development skills, which is really lacking, which is something that needs to be addressed. In 1994, the permanent secretary said that the HRD system was really ad hoc, disjointed. Some persons, actually, majority of the persons said that there was no system. And can't really blame them based on how it was back then. So this has improved in 2015, but they acknowledge that the HRD system exists, but there also needs to be some improvement. Now more so, not so much with the training needs, because people have the qualifications, at least on paper, but more so in terms of the placement of persons in the correct positions to really benefit the civil service. In 1994, the top managers, the senior persons said that the civil servants had negative attitudes. They were lazy, they didn't want to do any work. But in 2015, they acknowledged that, all right, there are some persons who don't want to do work, but there are also other persons who really contribute a lot to the civil service. So they had mixed feelings about that, and it wasn't seen as really terrible for the bad workers to be there, because it exists in every organization. Now, in 1994, the top management had some suggestions, some barriers. And some of these included, of course, financial constraints and insufficient human resources and physical resources to really carry out the HRD function. Now, in 2015, financial constraints are still an issue, but other issues that really came out were the attitudes of the persons, not necessarily not wanting to do the work, but more towards not applying the training to their work, to their workplace. You know, it's still an attitude of that they take everything and don't give back. So that really is a hindrance for the HRD system. Also, the placement of persons also came up as a big issue in 2015. because, again, the civil service orders, they limits the movement of persons in and out of the service. So it's very difficult to, say, terminate an employee in the civil service. So they're kind of stuck with persons who are not really performing, they get shifted around, so there's no additional finances to add positions, but that is the reality now in 2015. All right, so in 1994, the top managers made some suggestions as it relates to, they suggested doing HR planning in each department as opposed to just the Service Commissions department handling it. They suggested management development skills for middle and senior officers so that they'll really be able to handle the people skills, as well as on-the-job training instead of so much overseas training. Now in 2015, yes, placement is still a problem, and they do need persons to be trained based on the priority areas of the country, based on the needs of the civil service and the country in general. But I think the most significant issue here is that there is no performance appraisal system in the public service, but civil service of St. Vincent and the Grenadines right now. In 1994, there was one, but it was very colonial, it was very archaic. It wasn't measuring what a performance management system is supposed to measure, which is performance. So that has since been scrapped, and there was a pilot study done around, I think, between 2006 and 2008, but I understand that that was sold negatively to the members of the civil service, and it has since been rejected. So there is no performance appraisal system right now in the civil service, and it's really frustrating the permanent secretaries because it hinders their training plans, the training needs, it hinders the rewards that persons get, and so on. So that is a big one. All right, so let's move on to the survey. Again, I only got 12 responses, so I don't want you to take this as any sweeping finding. It's still preliminary, but I'll still tell you. Now, in 1994, Jack measured motivation based on whether persons want to spend a lifetime career in the civil service or not. I believe that this is not the best way to measure motivation, but I stuck with it for the sake of comparison. Now, in 1994, you see a lot more persons opted for no lifetime career in the civil service. And actually, turnover was quite a big problem in 1994, as opposed to 2015, where a lot more persons who responded to the survey, indicated that they do intend to have a lifetime career in the civil service. Now, although the sample was small, this is consistent with what came out in the interviews with the permanent secretaries and other persons. They were saying that persons do not want to leave. It's a secure job, it's a fairly good pay, they get good benefits of being a civil servant, so it's very they just rather not to leave because they can get away with a lot more in the civil service than in the private sector. Now, another measure of the motivating factors was that persons were asked to give one reason that they wanted to leave, that they would want to leave the civil service. Now, interestingly, both in 1994 and in 2015, the number one reason was lack of promotion. 1994 had training, but training doesn't seem to be an issue in 2015 now. Lack of promotion. Now, this would suggest, perhaps, I'm just speculating, perhaps political interference, bureaucracy, favoritism, all these little things that happen to us small islands where everybody, you call the minister and say, well, I wanted a work for my daughter. And he says, okay, send her, And then persons are in the service qualified to do the same position, to do the same job that the minister sent somebody to do, who may not necessarily be as qualified. And this really was one of the issues that came up in some of the extraneous comments in the survey with the civil servants. By the way, the civil servants who were in the survey, they were below the rank of permanent secretary. All right, so training. Now in 1994, the results were not that different in terms of persons who received training and persons who didn't. But in 2015, 11 of the 12 respondents indicated that they had received training while they were in the service. Again, it's a small sample, so please don't go running with this and saying that, this amount of persons in the Civil Service of St. Vincent and the Grenadines have been trained. May not necessarily be true. But Again, this is consistent with what came out in the interviews with the permanent secretaries and other members of the civil service. All right? So persons have the skills, they're participating in developmental activities within the civil service, but begs the question as to whether they're using it to enhance the service. In terms of placement of persons, not that different. Nothing really jumps out to say that anything much has changed. So, again, as I mentioned, this study is preliminary. And I come here to you with more questions than answers to the issue in the Civil Service of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But we can make some inferences. So I'll say that the preliminary results suggest that training has improved. You know, the education revolution came about in 2001. The persons who would have benefited from that are in the service right now. But it begs the question as to, it's a revolution where persons are being trained, but is it an evolution as opposed to persons giving back and transforming the organizations, especially the civil service, that they are going into? Also, the motivation to stay in the civil service has improved. I cannot say their motivation has improved because it was only measured based on whether or not they wanted to stay. So hopefully, when the study is finished, we can probably use more established motivation scale to determine the actual, whether or not persons, what is really making persons stay in the service, and if it's only a matter of the benefits that they get from being a civil servant. Also, a big one is that the placement is still problematic within the civil service. So I mentioned some of the barriers to that already. So I hope this gave you some insight into what's happening outside of Jamaica, in the smaller islands, at least only in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So thank you very much for listening.